I stood at attention outside the grand chamber of Conclave Reach, doing what diplomatic escorts do best, nothing, professionally. The station hummed around me. Somewhere behind those reinforced doors, Ambassador Delacroix was trying to convince the Dori hegemony that 3 settled human systems were, in fact, settled human systems, and therefore not available for mineral extraction. I could imagine her voice, measured, patient, the kind of calm that takes 20 years of training to produce. My job was simpler. Stand here, look serious. Let nobody through that door who wasn't supposed to go through that door. I had been doing it for 6 hours. The Dorfi guards across the corridor watched me the way you watch something mildly interesting at a zoo. Not threatening, not even curious really. Just observing, the way their kind observed most things, with the faint expression of beings who had already decided the answer before they looked at the question. I was used to it. Humans were new to the coalition. Barely 2 years since first contact. Barely 8 months since we'd earned our probationary seat at the table. Every species here had centuries of shared history with each other. We had a handshake agreement and a borrowed translation protocol. To them, we were small, upright, 2-limbed, no armor plating, no venom glands, no echolocation. We had soft skin and round eyes, and we made a lot of noise when we talked. The Dorhi in particular seemed to find us mildly amusing, like someone had let a group of house pets attend a formal dinner. What they did not know, because nobody had thought to tell them, and we had not thought to advertise it, was that our homeworld had a Pelian Danger Index rating of 9.2. Most species in the coalition came from worlds rated between 2 and 4. Comfortable worlds. Worlds where the most dangerous thing in the environment was also slower than them, or smaller, or easily avoided. Worlds that allowed their dominant species to develop in something resembling peace. Earth was not that kind of world. Earth was the kind of world where everything had teeth, or venom, or both. Where the oceans contained animals the size of buildings that hunted by sound. Where the forests had fungi that could grow through an insect's brain and control its body. Where microscopic things could end a life in days. We had grown up on a planet that seemed, genuinely, to be trying to remove us from it. We stayed anyway. We adapted. We learned every danger by name, and then, methodically, we learned to handle it. But I was not thinking about any of that standing in the corridor. I was thinking about how much my feet hurt, and whether the station cafeteria would still have that decent noodle soup by the time my shift ended. Then the chamber doors opened. Commander Vrethakalis came through them like a storm wearing a body. He was 7 feet of Dori military authority, his exoskeleton polished to a dark sheen, his 4 primary limbs moving with the controlled aggression of someone who was very angry, and very accustomed to that anger being respected. His translator unit crackled with words I was choosing, professionally, not to respond to. Something about mammals. Something about worms. He was heading for the communications wing. I stepped into his path, not aggressively. I placed myself between him and the corridor he was moving toward, feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped behind my back, and I said the words I had been trained to say. Commander, this section of the station is restricted to cleared personnel. I'll need to ask you to return to the delegation area, or the common floor. He stopped. He looked at me, or rather, he looked down at me, which was different, which carried its own message. His translator said something that my unit rendered as, "Move, soft thing." "Sir," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm not able to do that. Corridor 7 is restricted. I can arrange an escort to the delegation wing if you need assistance." He said something else. My translator had the decency to soften it slightly, but the meaning was clear enough. I was nothing. My species was nothing. My presence in this corridor was an inconvenience, like a piece of furniture that had been placed in the wrong spot. I said nothing. I stood exactly where I was. That was apparently the wrong answer. His secondary limb came up fast. Faster than I think he expected I could track, or maybe he just didn't care whether I tracked it. It caught me across the left side of my face. Not his full strength. It was contemptuous, not vicious. The kind of strike that said, "You are being corrected," not fought. The kind of strike he had probably delivered 100 times to subordinates who needed reminding of their position. For exactly half a second, the corridor was perfectly silent. I felt the sting spread across my cheekbone. I tasted copper. The edge of my vision went white, then cleared. And then something very calm settled into place inside me. I want to be clear about something. What happened next was not anger. I have been angry before, and anger is hot and loud, and it makes you sloppy. What I felt was not anger. It was something much older and much quieter. It was the thing that lives underneath training, underneath thought, underneath language. The thing that 100,000 years of surviving a very dangerous planet puts into the back of your nervous system and leaves there, ready, patient, waiting for exactly this kind of moment. I had studied Dori anatomy for 6 months before this posting. Not because anyone told me to, because that is what you do when you are going to stand in a room with a species you have never met, in a situation that might become complicated. You learn them, their joint structure, their pressure points, the places where their exoskeleton has gaps, the places where force translates most efficiently. I had asked a xenobiologist about it over lunch one afternoon, casual as asking about the weather. She had seemed genuinely pleased that someone was interested. My left hand closed around his secondary limb at the joint. Not catching it. I was already past catching it. Redirecting it. Rotating it in the direction it was not designed to go. Not far enough to cause injury. Far enough to create a mechanical disadvantage that no amount of strength can overcome. His body followed his arm. It had to. That is physics. My right forearm came up and made contact with the junction of his thorax, the soft seam between the upper and lower sections of his exoskeleton, which the xenobiologist had described over her noodle soup as roughly equivalent to a solar plexus in function, though not in location. I did not hit him hard, I hit him precisely. The difference matters. He went down. 7 feet of door-high hegemony commander, decorated military officer, person accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any room he entered, went down onto the floor of Corridor 7, in approximately 3 seconds, and I went with him, one knee between his lower limbs, my forearm across the back of his neck joint, not pressing hard enough to injure, pressing exactly hard enough that he could not move without my permission. I could feel him testing that, the brief, involuntary attempt to rise, meeting resistance, and stopping. I spoke at a completely normal volume. Commander Vrethakalis, you are being detained for physical assault on a coalition diplomatic officer. I am Corporal Mara Voss, 34th Human Expeditionary Force, identification number HEF 4471. Please remain still. I clicked my comms with my free hand. Control, this is Voss at Corridor 7. I need security and a medical officer to my position. We have an incident. My voice was the steadiest thing in the corridor. I became aware, slowly, that the 2 door-high guards who had been stationed across the hall had not moved. They were standing exactly where they had been standing when Vrethakalis came through the door. They were looking at me, not at him, at me. I did not know exactly what their faces were doing, because door-eye facial expressions require a specific course of study I had not taken, but their body language, which I had studied, was doing something I did not have a word for yet. It was not aggression. It was not submission. It was, I thought, recalibration. Security arrived in 4 minutes. Medical arrived in 5. Vrethakalis was removed from the corridor, with a formality that felt slightly surreal. I gave my statement to a Keth security officer who took notes in triplicate and asked me 3 times, in 3 different ways, whether I was certain about the sequence of events. I was certain about the sequence of events. Ambassador Delacroix found me 20 minutes later in the medical bay, where a very polite station physician was putting something cold and slightly luminescent on my cheek. She stood in the doorway for a moment without saying anything. I had worked with her long enough to know that meant she was choosing her words carefully. "How are you feeling?" she finally asked. "Fine," I said. "The soup is going to be cold by now, but otherwise fine." She looked at me for another long moment. Then she said quietly, "I have been trying to get the hegemony to take us seriously for 8 months." She did not say anything else. She did not need to. The diplomatic incident, as these things go, was considerable. The hegemony filed a formal objection. Conclave Reach's Security Council reviewed the corridor footage in its entirety. The footage showed, with complete clarity, and from 4 separate angles, exactly what had happened, and in exactly what order. The objection was noted and set aside. I was cleared before the end of the day. What happened after that was quieter and slower, and in some ways more interesting. The Dori delegation became careful, not friendly, careful. There is a difference. Before the incident, they had moved through the station with the easy confidence of people who knew exactly where they stood in the order of things. After it, they moved with attention. They watched the human staff. They watched me specifically, when I returned to my post 2 days later with a bruise on my cheekbone that I wore without comment. I heard, through the kind of informal channels that exist on any station where multiple species are living in close quarters, that the Dori had requested a full cultural and biological briefing on humanity from the Coalition's xenological records. I heard they had found the Pelian rating. I heard they had read about Earth. I tried to imagine what that was like, reading about a world where the oceans hold animals the size of structures, where the land is covered in plants that fight each other for light and space, where even the smallest creatures have evolved weapons of some kind, reading about the things that lived there alongside us for millennia, reading about what we had done, not just to survive, but to grow, to spread, to decide collectively that the planet was ours and that we intended to stay. I tried to imagine reading all of that, and then looking back at the footage of Corridor 7. Word spread through the station. Stations are small worlds, and small worlds have fast rumors. By the end of the week, every species in Conclave Reach seemed to know that a human soldier had detained a Dorhai commander in under 3 seconds, and then radioed it in with the composure of someone filing a routine report. Some of them thought it was remarkable. Some of them thought it was frightening. The Keth security officer who had taken my statement stopped me in the cafeteria on the 4th day and asked, with what I recognized as genuine scientific curiosity, how long humans trained for that kind of response. I had to think about how to answer that honestly. Our whole lives, I told her. We just don't usually call it training. She wrote something in her notes. She did that a lot. I sat in the observation bay on the last evening of that week, watching the stars. There are a lot of stars from Conclave Reach. The station is positioned at a junction of 4 systems, and on a clear night, which is every night in space, you can see the light of dozens of suns. Some of them have planets. Some of those planets have life. Some of that life will eventually find its way here, to this table, to these negotiations. I thought about handshakes, the human custom of extending an open hand to a stranger, palm visible, fingers spread. Xenologists love that one. They describe it as a greeting gesture, a social ritual. They are not wrong, but it is also something older than that. It is the gesture of showing that your hand is empty, that you are not holding anything, that you are, for this moment, choosing not to use what you have. It is what you do when you approach something that might be dangerous. You show your hands. I thought about eye contact, another one the xenologists write papers about. Most prey species look away from a threat, because looking directly at something that could hurt you is provocative, and prey species cannot afford provocation. Predators hold eye contact, because looking directly at something is how you track it, how you assess it, how you decide. We hold eye contact. We have always held eye contact. I thought about the things we do when we are most afraid. We tell jokes, we sing songs, we run toward the thing that is burning instead of away from it. These are not rational behaviors if you are trying to maximize your individual survival. They are the behaviors of something that has decided, somewhere below conscious thought, that survival is not an individual project. I thought about Commander Vretha Kalas. I bore him no particular ill will. He had made a mistake born entirely from ignorance, and ignorance is correctable. He had looked at something small and upright and soft-skinned, and he had seen something that would move when pushed. He did not know that we were built on a world that pushed back. He did not know that everything on that world pushed back, and that we had grown up in the middle of it, and that the pushing back is not something we do consciously anymore. It is simply something we are. He thought he was reminding a diplomat's guard of her place. He forgot what planet she came from.